What's going on, Summoners? Welcome back to another Wild Rift video. My name is Kangas, and today I'm going to be helping you with everything you need to know about the mid lane, home of mages and assassins. Before we get started though, our question of the day is, who do you think is the strongest mid laner? Every time I play against a good Zed, they are impossible to lock down and just do so much damage. What do you think? With that being said, let's start talking about the mid lane.
Mid lane is versatile and impactful. If you love skill expression and outplaying your opponent, mid lane is where most of the action happens. Because the role is in the center of the map, you're always close enough to help anyone on your team. A powerful mid laner can totally dominate a game with their skills alone. The most important thing to remember when playing mid is that you're the best at pushing a lead. When you're strong, you can impact both Baron and Dragon lane with ease. Because of this, there's a lot of attention on you. You're kind of like the star of the show, and players will depend on you to stay relevant. If you're behind and lose the turret early, it can be really difficult for your team to get back into the game. Mid lane is a fast-paced lane. The most popular champions like Ahri, Akali, Zed, and Lux depend on difficult skill shots and outmaneuvering your opponents. One wrong move can mean a quick death. You also have to worry about the enemy jungler coming from both sides, meaning you'll really never feel safe. Fortunately for you, mid lane is the shortest lane in the game. Windows of opportunity come and go in a flash. If anything I just said excites you, mid lane might be the role for you. Don't be disappointed if you aren't doing super well when you start. If you want to learn more about Wild Rift, we're planning to release guides to help explain every role in the game. Keep an eye on the channel so you can have all the resources you'll need to get better at the game. It's really easy to know where to go as a mid laner. You're always going to be in the center lane from your nexus, so try to remember where your other teammates are playing, since the map changes depending on what side you're on. Look at the markers if you're ever confused about who's going where. Mid lane is a 1v1 lane, meaning you'll be facing off against one player. There are a few key differences between mid lane and the other 1v1 lane, Baron lane. The first is that you're surrounded on both sides by the river. This means that you'll need to pay extra attention to the enemy jungler to avoid obvious deaths. The second major difference is that you have the power to influence the entire map with relative ease. If you see your jungler is fighting the enemy jungler, it's usually the mid laner who needs to go and turn the tides. Because of this, playing mid lane creates some of the best habits of any other role. In League of Legends, people consider Faker as the best player of all time. Guess what role he plays? That's right, mid. There's just so much responsibility and carry potential in the lane, and Wild Rift is no different. Okay, so we've talked a lot about how important mid is. So what kind of champions are there? How exactly do you carry? Well, first we should divide the lane into two major categories. The majority of champions are mage mid laners or assassin mid laners. Mage mid laners rely on magic damage abilities to lock down and annihilate their enemies. They're particularly good from a range, trying to stay out of harm's way while doing the most damage. Think of Lux and Ziggs, who both use their long-range skills to poke and chip away at enemies. The best part about mages is that they are extremely good at killing minions quickly. As the game progresses, it is usually your job to clear waves and get gold quickly so that your spells pack a punch. Assassin mid laners are pretty much the opposite of mage mid laners. They're the flashy killers who use mobility and burst damage to quickly kill their opponents. Champions like Zed and Fizz excel at getting into the backline, killing the squishy AD carry, and then jumping out of the fight. Good assassin players are a nightmare to face, using their high mechanical skill to dodge skill shots and wreak havoc. When you start learning a role, it's best to stick to one or two champions. This way, you'll be able to get comfortable with a champion while learning everything that you can about the role. If you switch champions too often, it can be really hard to learn the role and your champion at the same time. It doesn't really matter who you pick to learn, just stick with who you find enjoyable. Now that you know what kind of champions are played mid, let's get started on the basics of gameplay. We're going to divide an average game of Wild Rift into three sections: early game, mid game, and late game. Early game can be best described as the time spent from the start of the game until the first turret falls. This usually will happen between the 5 and 7 minute mark, depending on how aggressively your lanes are going. For mid laners, the early game focuses on the laning phase, meaning your 1v1 showdown against your opponent. Mid game happens right after the first turret falls. This usually happens from the 7 minute mark until the 13 minute mark. For mid laners, your goal is to help your team secure Dragon and knock down enemy turrets. This is when you want to take advantage of your high damage output, so try to be part of any fight. Late game is usually determined by your entire team grouping to take down major objectives like the enemy Nexus turrets and Baron Nashor. This can last from the 13-minute mark up until the end of the game. Your role here depends greatly on what kind of champion you're playing, so make sure to pay attention as we break down the goals for both mages and assassins. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. The early game is all about your laning and 1v1 matchup. Some champions are very strong early on and start to get weaker later in the game, while others are the exact opposite. Mage mid laners are usually stronger in the late game, while assassins tend to be really strong in the middle of the game. This is because assassins love to find out of position enemies, which happens less often when both teams start to group up. In the early game, mage mid laners want to use their abilities to harass the enemy and also last hit minions. Minions are your main source of both gold and experience, so do your best to master killing them with your auto attacks and spells. If you're against an assassin, also do your best to harass them with your ranged abilities. If you're against a melee champion like Fizz, don't be afraid to hit him when he tries to last hit his minions. Assassins want to get all of their abilities before they make any major moves in the early game. Try to get as many last hits as possible, but don't worry if you have to give up a few. In Wild Rift, you'll still earn gold if you're next to a minion when it dies, so last hitting isn't as important as survival. Once you have all 3 of your main abilities, you can try and force an all-in on your opponent. Long-range champions like Lux are really scared of a level 3 Zed. Once the first turret gets knocked down, both teams will start to look for fights in places outside of their lanes. This is when you'll start looking to work with your team to move around the map. If you're ever feeling lost, ask yourself these questions. First, who is a major threat on the enemy team? All mid laners have some sort of burst potential. The only difference is the effective range of your abilities. If the enemy AD carry is fed and you're Ahri, do your best to land your charm on them for the kill. As Akali, landing your E-Shuriken will give you an easy way to dive in. Next, ask yourself, how does my team win a fight? Usually, the answer to this is taking out the enemy threat, but this isn't always true. Sometimes, you'll be even with the other mid laner, but your team's AD carry is really strong. It's a better idea to help out your AD carry and use your abilities on the targets they're focusing instead of trying to make your own flashy plays. Finally, ask yourself, which lane do we need to push? As a mid laner, you're able to kill minions really fast with your spells, so make sure you aren't missing out on free gold and experience. Dragon is a major part of the mid game, spawning at 6 minutes every single time. This should be your team's #1 priority, since the dragon gives permanent buffs for your whole team. Make sure you remember what your job is and get ready to fight. The late game can be a tense time for both teams. Usually the game only reaches this point if both teams are evenly matched, so you should be proud that you made it this far. As a mid laner, here's a few things you want to focus on. Baron is the major objective at this point in the game, giving your team massive buffs and pushing potential. This is when both teams start to group up and fight 5-on-5. As a mage, this is when you really show your skills. Finding the right targets with your abilities is crucial to your team's success, so stay focused. As an assassin, it can be hard to jump into the enemy team of 5 and assassinate your target successfully. It's usually best to try and stay out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Try and wait until the enemy uses an important ability, like an Ashe or Malphite ultimate, before you go in. This way, you're more likely to catch your opponent off guard and secure the kill. And that's pretty much everything you need to know about the basics of mid lane. Don't think too much about item builds and runes just yet. Riot does a great job of giving you the general path for any champion, so just follow along and purchase the items that are shown to you when you return to base. Hopefully you've learned a thing or two about mid lane from this guide. Wild Rift is full of action and skill expression, especially in the mid lane. The role is filled with excitement and difficult decisions, but with enough practice, you'll be carrying games in no time.
Well, thanks so much for watching. We're always excited to help players like you start experiencing Wild Rift. Also, don't forget to answer the questions of the day in the comments below so that we can know what you all think. We're planning on coming out with a bunch of guides, so also subscribe to our channel if you haven't already so that you don't miss out. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. For safety, I don't feel safe. Help. Okay, go.